This is Matt Brown, and you're listening to Just a Good Conversation. For over a quarter century, Dave Sandford has been covering the NHL Stanley Cup Finals. That's hundreds of games with blood, sweat, and beards. Most people would love to just see one game and have that moment of a lifetime. Dave hasn't taken it for granted for 1 second.
To have the opportunity to cover sports history from a front row seat, and that's the other side of it I look at is like the greatest and biggest and wealthiest hockey fan in the world can't do what I get to do. There is no money can't purchase the experience that I get.
I'm Matt Brown, host of Just a Good Conversation. Take a listen to our archives. My guests have ranged from small business owners, world-renowned chefs, professional athletes, and former baseball coach Nick Friscardo.
I get cut from the baseball team my freshman year, and I was going, I get cut? I said, so I went home and I was like down because it was like losing my best friend, you know. And he said, my dad goes, what's wrong, son? I said, hey, Pop, I said, I got cut from the baseball team. He goes, you did? My dad was pretty smart, you know. He said, so what are you going to do? And I go, what do you mean? What am I going to do? Go talk to the coach? No, the coach cut you. He said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll guarantee you I'll never ever get cut again. Ever.
The rest of my conversation with Nick can be found on our archives, justagoodconversation.com. Let's take a quick break for a sponsor before diving into my conversation with Dave Sandford. Maine Farmhouse Brands was started by Dan McCool, a healthcare professional. His goal was to make premium soap. Most people may not realize how important the right soap is for their health and the difference between soap and detergent. Soap is made from natural ingredients like animal and plant fats, whereas detergent is made from synthetic, often harsh chemicals, even fossil fuels like petroleum. Maine Farmhouse Brands makes their own soap with natural ingredients, free from harsh chemicals. So if you want to keep your skin healthy and clean, I would recommend using Maine Farmhouse Brand soap instead of detergent. You can find their body wash, shave soaps, laundry soap, and beard oils, and more at mainfarmhousebrands.com. We're celebrating 25 years with Dave. How are you, sir?
I'm great, thank you. And yourself?
I'm great. This is excited because it's not too often you get one person that's spanned a sport and its finals for as long as you have over a period of great change. When you started, you were a young lad, a wee lad, running around the arena, and now it's changed in such a way it would be hard to explain to young 24-year-old Dave what it would be like years later. Was your first experience going to the finals? Walk me through that day. What was that like for you? In Detroit, right?
It was in Detroit, just down the road from home. So that was somewhat exciting because Joe Louis Arena was a place it was the NHL arena I'd been to more than any other arena in my career, given my proximity to there, 2 hours away.
Right.
So that was special in that regard to be doing my first final in an arena that I'm somewhat familiar with. But yeah, it was exciting and it was nerve-wracking all at the same time. You know, all of those kind of crazy emotions that you go through during something like that. And I remember thinking like, okay, this is it. And that first game, realizing like how many other photographers are there at the time. Cause back then there was probably like 35 to 40 some odd photographers covering a Stanley Cup final game.
Right. Cause they played the Washington Capitals, right?
They played the Caps.
So You've got Detroit's media in full swing. Newspapers are still living large. And You have the DC market plus national,
exactly. Plus Canadian national
right.
News still covers it.
Right.
Man. Back in the day too, you had like ESPN shooting, Sports Illustrated.
Sport Magazine still around?
I don't know. Sport Magazine was still around, but
Hockey Digest or Hockey
like
News?
Hockey Digest.
Sporting News?
sporting news. There was a lot more publications back then.
Jesus, you start
So
to
it
think
was,
about all that. Oh,
yeah, it was, even the networks like, ESPN, ABC, NBC, they had their own shooters. There was a lot of people. So it was a little overwhelming that way.
trying to get
And
to know
then,
everybody.
yeah. And I also remember too, very quickly finding out how, I guess the business side of things can, take precedent over, friendships or whatever. Because I remember Detroit used to rotate positions. So it was the only arena where it's like you would get your first period position, second, third period, and then it would rotate. And if we went to overtime, then you would revert back to, I believe it was your second period position. So I had negotiated with Bruce Bennett for a spot in, which actually that was the great thing about the Joe. They had really low glass and they had really unique shooting point, vantage points because of that low glass.
Yes.
So above the visitors and the home tunnel, they had these VOMs that the players walked out of that were super low, right over the bench, and they'd put like boards over top of those. So you would climb over and sit there and have this kind of slightly elevated vantage point, but you could see the whole ice. And Bruce wanted an ice level and I wanted to see the full ice. So we traded. I can't remember what happened. I think it was game one, went to overtime, and I went back to my assignment, like where we were told that you revert to your second period position. Well, I get back there and Bruce shows up and he's like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I'm like, reverting back to my second period position. And
following the rules. That's what I'm doing.
This is my second period position. And I'm like, no, it was mine. I shot here in the second you traded with me. And he gave me this kind of, listen, punk, like I've been in this industry a long time. And he's like, I don't give a crap what you want or said or whatever. He's like, pulls out the paper, Bruce Bennett Studios, this is my spot. And then scrambling to, get to my position for the overtime before the puck dropped. And I learned very quickly then that, there's a business side of things and the business side of it can be somewhat ruthless. And
yeah.
Friendships go out the window.
Yeah, especially in overtime, damn it.
Exactly. So, but I made the most of it. And, but yeah. And then, to fast forward to the end of the series, that was a sweep, that series.
Right.
And it's still, knock on wood, the only sweep in the Stanley Cup final of my career. And I hope, because I've always wanted 7 games. I want 7 games plus overtime. I want the chance to get that Game 7 Stanley Cup winning overtime goal photograph, So anyway, it was a sweep. And there I was on the ice in Washington. And I remember watching the cup being carried out in the ice and having to take a moment and put my camera down and just say to myself, just breathe. I'm just taking more photos. Like, this is just, don't make it bigger than it is type thing, and just relax. And I had to take a few, seconds to just kind of breathe and get focused on the task at hand. And then, it turned out to be incredible. And, one of those things where, when I look back on it and I look at those photos and I can still remember that feeling of what it was like being out there, and Steve Yzerman hoisting the cup and the chills that went down my spine as it happened. I still get chills now talking about it. And because that's something, not only had I dreamt about photographing it, I dreamt about just being at a Stanley Cup final. I dreamt, obviously, I think like anybody that works in hockey, about hoisting the Stanley Cup myself. And this was as close as I was going to get, and it was just a very, very special memory. And what's amazing about it is that 26 years later, that moment it doesn't change. It's still just as, I still get chills. It's still just as exciting. I still get, a little bit of those nerves because it's like, well, I don't want to screw this up. You don't,
right.
You don't get a second chance to get the captain hoisting,
Yeah. It's one time.
Sometimes things happen where, bodies get in front of you or the player turns the wrong way or he takes a few strides before he hoists it. and you're not in the most ideal spot. But over the course of a quarter century, I've learned to just go with the flow, and those things happen. And you may not always get the greatest photo of that cup hoist, but I just try and remember that, hey, I'm still here. I'm still here because I'm doing something right. Don't just don't put so much weight on just one moment. There'll be lots of great moments to come throughout this cup celebration. That's what sort of goes through my head.
Do you remember what young Dave was carrying gear-wise back then? What were you shooting on?
Yeah, I was shooting Nikon back then, and using
so F5s.
No, I was using. Oh my gosh, I can't even.
N90s.
N90s.
N90S, yeah, probably.
And the N90, and I had a 70-200 on. Shooting film. I was shooting strobed back then, so I was probably, mostly shot Fuji, 400, chrome film.
Right.
Using the pocket wizards, and like I say, that's the other thing too. When you're shooting a cup presentation, things happen pretty fast still. It's not as fast as the game, but you sort of get one crack at the hoist of the cup, and then it's like 1,000, 1,000. I can shoot again, so you have to factor that in. You have to factor in that you got 36 exposures, and it's going to take a moment to rewind that film, and change it out, put the new one in, and you're going to miss stuff. That's just the way it is.
Right. And that was acceptable back then because Dave needed to rewind. Dave needed to put in film, put the film in the right pocket, all those little details. And then you get back to it. Now there's no excuse for time lost the way, editors.
No, you're correct. Yeah. Like I used to carry chalk bags for mountain climbing. I had one clipped on my right-hand side that was new film, and one on the left-hand side that was
exposed,
used film.
Yep.
And that was the quickest way to access it, for me anyway. And I carried, I think, for my first maybe 15 or more Stanley Cups, I had this Patagonia fanny pack that was, the teal and purple, and I would have extra batteries and a flash and just things like that. And
random double A batteries, just all the, you never know. Yeah.
Yeah, you just exactly. And
my biggest fear was the PC cord going bad, because you had to go to the pocket wizard back then to your PC cord still. Didn't have hot shoe. Mm-hmm. My fear was, God forbid, if I snap this PC cord or it goes bad.
Yeah, because when you're running around the ice too, and you're bumping elbows with everybody, it's kind of chaotic at times, and it not that it's intentional, but things get hooked on somebody else's gear or clothing or whatever. Yeah, there are all these little things that you have to worry about, and you're always checking. So you might shoot 12 exposures, and then you waste one just so you can make sure the strobes are going, and and wasting one out of 36 is. It's a big deal back then.
Yeah.
Especially when the event is important and things are happening fast. It was
in a typical game back then. How many exposures do you think you went through? How many rolls of film? Because you're on lights. You're on lights, so you're 2 frames a second. You're slow.
Yeah. Yeah. On average, I went through about 10 rolls of film a game.
Jesus, that's great. 10 rolls.
I usually was in the range of 300 to 360 some odd frames a game on average. Maybe a bit more at a cup final, just because there's a little bit more happening pregame, and you are maybe shooting a bit more because of the level of importance.
Right. Now, you were truly then in 98 shooting for the archive, because nothing was going to be seen the next day. Nothing was for social media. It was truly for archiving the moment.
Yeah. At the most, some of the papers subscribed to NHL images back then, but yeah, stuff still had to be, I'm getting ahead of myself because that was when we went digital. So you're right. No, it was just, shipping the film off. It was getting processed, and then maybe the fastest we would see anything was Sports Illustrated or the Sporting News or ESPN.
Mm-hmm.
So film would be turned around maybe in 24 to 48 hours. And if there was any request or anything important enough, it got sent off to those 3 publications.
Right.
And then if I was fortunate, then you would see something inside or on the cover of one of those magazines, maybe a week to a week and a half later. Because that's when they published weekly, right? So just kind of depended when the cup would end. Yeah. And that was the gem. That was like, if you got to see something and, and especially in SI back then, that was super special.
And the scary thing was you could have had a great shot on a Tuesday. The cup ends on a Monday or Tuesday, but the magazine had already closed. Then you have to try to compete with the whole week's worth of sports and hope to God, something doesn't happen at a Florida State game, or, a cowboy doesn't, break a leg, or whatever else is happening.
Exactly.
And then, all the weird things of sports, and then you're, still around. Like,
right. And the other thing too, we, like the NHL, we were always kind of low on the totem pole as far as getting published in those publications, because, let's face it, there was, NASCAR, college sports, golf, like everything came above hockey.
Yep.
So hockey wasn't in there every single week. It wasn't, maybe as we got into the playoffs, there might've been a short article with some photos as we got deeper into the playoffs, but yeah, it wasn't always a guarantee that hockey was going to be in there. And then they had their staffers. They had the, rest his soul, Lou Capizzola. Right. Love Lou. He was amazing. And David Clutho, who were staffed at all these games too. So they had their own people there, for example. Dillip was shooting for the Sporting News, and ESPN had their own people. So I wasn't necessarily first and foremost to be, have my content run in those publications. They had their staffers. So you had to have something really special or something that maybe they missed.
Right. Between strobes. Yeah. That was it. That's the crazy thing.
Yep.
So your second year, it's on here as one of the top 10 games of all time in NHL history. That Stanley Cup game between Dallas and Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
were you, you're still wet behind the ears, new kid. And that game is gold. An absolute stunner. Goes down 4-2. Dallas wins, but overtime, 3 overtimes, if I remember right.
Yeah.
How were you adjusting as a young guy with that much overtime, again, on strobes, film, and you probably got Bruce Bennett to deal with?
Well, I was still young enough that I could stay up late, no problem. So that wasn't an issue.
11 o'clock, you weren't yawning?
I didn't go to bed that night. And I ended up going, woke up in Buffalo and, well, I didn't go to bed, but I ended up in Dallas that night. So, or early the next morning.
Youth, it's an amazing thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. No, you definitely put added pressure on yourself in those situations. It's like if Dallas scores, it's going to be the Stanley Cup winning goal. Mm-hmm. And you want to capture that. You don't want to just capture it for yourself, though. I'm working for the National Hockey League. I don't want to blow it. You know what I mean? Like,
you're covering history.
Yeah. So you put this added pressure on yourself to hopefully get that moment, but you have to be realistic too, in that maybe it's going to happen in the other end. Maybe I'm going to have bodies between me and whoever the goal scorer is. Like, there are so many things that are out of your control that I now am more at ease with as my career's gone on. But back then, you get frustrated, you get mad or whatever. But at the same time too, I learned long ago that maybe as a kid growing up playing hockey, it's a team sport, and it's no different than when I was shooting. When I was working for the NHL back then, I was working with Craig Melvin and Diane Sobolewski.
Yeah.
Diane was the Hartford team photographer before they moved. And Craig had been, based out of Buffalo and shooting NHL for a long time. Both brilliant shooters and amazing human beings. And I loved working with them. And I learned so much from working with them. And again, the focus being on, we were a team. So we were, one was elevated, Craig was ice level in one end and I was ice level in another end. Diane was elevated that game, if I recall. And we would rotate. So it was all fair to us. Like we would just switch out games. But that particular game, the winning goal was scored in the far end. Yeah. I had a remote out there, but my net cam was in the opposite end. Craig Melvin happened to be at the end the goal was scored at, and he had an overhead and his net cam trigger on the same channel in that goal. So Craig got the goal from 3 different angles, and you're personally a little bit bummed that I don't have anything on it. I didn't even have an angle down the ice, so I don't have any photographic evidence of that moment in hockey history.
Did you even have a line of sight? Could you see what was happening? I could see it. I could see through the glass because I was on a position like basically the hole around where the hash marks are in the far end. So I could see it. But you couldn't get your angle in the camera.
Shoot it. Yeah. And I just it happened and it was like, oh my God, and I remember shooting Belfort throwing his arms up in the air. And then the next thing I did was I'm just shuffling past all these fans in the front row to get out the penalty box to get out on the ice. It was just so chaotic. And I remember Buffalo not leaving the bench and not, but you don't know all that stuff really until after, like you're sort of in the moment and was like, what's going on here? And I had no idea that his foot was in the crease or anything like that. Like, I'm just doing what I got to do. And that's when the rules changed as far as like goal scored, doors are open, everybody's out there. That year changed everything to the point where, okay, everybody has to go out Zamboni gate, and they're, it's signaled by the officials to, Dan Craig back then and now Mike Craig or Derek King, like, okay, we can open the doors now.
Yeah. It was chaotic. Changed. I remember that, like absolutely all hell broke loose and people were like, whoa, wait a minute. But it was too late.
Yeah. And
confetti had fallen.
It was like, I remember being on the ice and Craig being like, I think I got it. But you don't know,
right?
We got to send the film off. And sure enough, he had it from the overhead with his foot in the crease and the puck in the net. From the side, it was I think there was some obstruction there, but still he had it. And then the net cam, I remember Craig used a 20 mil instead of a fisheye. So it was a little tight. So he had Hull with his foot in the crease on the follow through and Hasek stretched out. But the puck was, if he had a wider lens, the puck would have been there. But he had a 20 mil, so you can't see the puck. It's still a great shot and it ran everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
But I was so stoked for Craig. Like, the way I look at it is like, we got it. The NHL, our team, we did our part. Because as I say, you're not going to get every single moment. Like sometimes guys will bitch and complain about like the position they get. And, I've never quite understood it. Yeah, I get it. Like if you come into the rink today, you're like, well, sure, I'd love to be in the end where Connor McDavid attacks twice. Mm-hmm. But if I don't get that, I don't care. And my logic has always been, well, there's team guys or guys that have shot here all season long. I don't want to be that guy that comes in and the NHL is like, all right, where do you want to go? I'm like, well, if Vegas is here, well, where does Jeff shoot? I'm not going to take his spot.
Right.
Like I don't want to be that guy. And plus, like you say, I don't know. It's not scripted. You don't know where things are going to unfold. So I've always just been like, hey, I'm grateful to be here. I'm at ice level and I've got a hole in the glass and let it unfold wherever it may. That's part of the thrill of it all. So
I like the fact, though, that you went on to Belfort and shot the goalie going across, because how many people would miss that and just be like, oh, I missed the shot. I didn't get it. I'm going to make my way onto the ice. But there's still a photo to be made of a lonely goalie throwing his pads and making his way to his teammates, because that's what you forget. He's on the other end alone.
Yeah. And I think I can credit, I've always loved goaltenders. When I was growing up playing road hockey and pond hockey and everything, I always wanted to be the goalie. And I played net when I was super young for part of the season, I think. But I was just always fascinated by goalies, and I've always shot goalies.
Okay.
And I can credit Denny Brodeur for that, because early in my career, I I got to sit beside him in Montreal for so many games, and Denny would always talk about shooting the goalies and how it was his favorite to shoot as well. And so a lot of credit goes to, you know, my way of thinking and the way I've shot goaltenders over the years is just from getting to hang out shooting hockey games with the legendary Denny Brodeur.
That's not bad right there, my friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you noticed? Okay, so there I saw an interesting one looking at the stats. It's very interesting. In your 25 years, 26 of overall, it's always staggered. It's a Florida, it's a Tampa, it's an LA, it's a Detroit. Like it's no one's dominant. You looked at those 70s though. You had Philly, Canada, Montreal, or Canadians, Montreal, and then the Islanders. Like they had for 8 years, it was Montreal, and then 4 years of the Islanders, and then Edmonton.
Yeah.
It was
and
like
Edmonton.
This huge block for a while. Philly, Montreal, and like now, any year it could be anybody.
It really could, but at the same time, I look at how many repeats in my career. Like how many times have I shot New Jersey in the Stanley Cup final? I'm not saying they've won it every year.
Right.
Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago,
Avalanche, right?
Tampa.
Yeah.
The Avalanche. Like I've had a lot of repeats as far as the clubs that I've shot. But, you know, and I guess, you know, as close as I have come would probably be earlier in my career with Detroit, being there as much as I was. And then there was just a kind of couple of years off and they kind of came back again. And then lately, like I say, Tampa. I mean, they've had some unbelievable runs. And as close as I've come to a dynasty and, you know, and Chicago, you know, 3 out of 5 years there, like it just, so there's been a fair share of repeat customers, but not the dominance, like you say, of like the 70s and 80s, where it was like year after year after year after year. Yeah. And I'm grateful for that. I like going different places. I like being in different rinks and different, different cities and seeing the different atmospheres. And, you know, I grew up an Oiler fan. I loved watching it, you know, throughout the 80s as a teenager, watching the Oilers dominate the way that they did. And would I love to have been there a few years earlier? Sure. But, you know, that wasn't the case. And I just, it's been fun to go to different cities. And I do, as my career's gone on, it's kind of funny how picky and choosy I get when the playoffs are happening. I'm like, it's kind of a mixed, you know, based on the club itself and like what's the talent, the exciting level of hockey they may or may not play.
Right.
And then the atmosphere in the city and the city itself.
Sure.
You know, I'm like, so I get selfish and it's like, okay, well, this year when it boiled down to it, I'm like, well, if we go to Florida, then I could go to the beach on off days. If it's going to be in Vegas, well, then there's great food, great meals and everything, great restaurants and nightlife and all that stuff. So it's like, yeah, you selfishly sort of look at it this way. Once, you know, and it's also as well, I've made so many friendships over the years. So I look at who plays for who or who's on what club.
Right. I can go see this guy and I can go see this guy. And
yeah. Well, you want to see people you have become friends with succeed.
Right.
Or
I haven't seen her in a while. Hopefully she's going to be, that's always that way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's those factor into who who or where you want to go as well. But it's all out of your control and you have to go with the flow. That's just the way it is. And that's part of the excitement of playoff hockey.
Have you seen a building change over those 25 years have you seen any new buildings come in?
Oh yeah. Tons.
And are you happy with some of them? And some of them you wish like, God, if you just contacted me, I could have told you where to put the holes a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, that's where I've been consulted with for many buildings through the NHL, through hockey ops, through my boss, through some of the clubs. And I think like, wow, like, you know, those may just be little things, but it's not lost upon me. You know, like they're changing the nets and everything too. And I've been consulting with hockey ops over that as to where, you know, how it will impact our net cam. And I'm like, like, I just got a chill thinking about it. Cause I'm like, there's a kid in me, the 12-year-old kid who's just a big hockey fan who never would have thought that one day the National Hockey League is going to call me and ask me my opinion on something that, has an impact on the, not necessarily on the game itself, but, like when they're building these new arenas and where they're going to place strobes, like, I've had to go into some of the new buildings before they're done being built to do this stuff, and where positions are, and running back in the day for strobes, like, are we going to be able to run wiring that goes down through the structure and come out to our positions, and
Right.
Where strobes would be positioned. And it's just incredible to think like, somebody values my opinion enough, and I've made that much of an impact on the game and the history of recording the game that they'll consult with me on that stuff. I've seen a lot of building changes. I miss Maple Leaf Gardens big time. I miss the Joe. I miss Northlands Coliseum. Like, those places were small and intimate. I know that, the new arenas are grand and, they're plush and everything, but there was an intimacy to those arenas that is just lost now for the most part. I really, of the newer arenas, like, I like when they take a unique spin on them, like Minnesota, where they have like make it look like cottage country or cabin, where it's like the wainscoting, even in the bowels of the arena, is all down there, and they make it look like you're going to the cottage or something. Like, it's got its own little unique characteristics, same architect as Denver's arena, but again, their own personal touch on it.
Right.
The Joe's very modern and everything, and not the Joe, sorry, Little Caesars.
Little Caesars.
it's an awe-inspiring place to walk into. But again, it's so much bigger. Like, the Joe felt like the ceiling was right on top of you,
right.
And it smelled like stale beer and peanuts. And I love that,
Yep.
If
you took people today who hadn't gone to a hockey game at all and took them to old Chicago or where the Islanders play on the island, like, they'd be like, oh my God, this is so dank and small, and no video boards, no ribbons, right? It was probably all bulb lighting on shot clock and the scoreboard and everything. It was such a darker building back then.
Yeah.
That I don't think people understand, because LED and the ribbons have really illuminated a building in a way. Now you're looking up and you can see the rafters. You can see everything. Back in the day, it was looking into space. There was nothing up there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, and maybe that's part of why I love them so much, because everybody's always said, oh, you're a vampire. Like, I live in darkness. I have little 20-watt bulbs in my place, and everything is all dim and dark, and I like cloudy days like I have here today. I'm not a fan of big bright light.
Says a guy who shoots on strobes.
Yeah, exactly. Now, obviously, it makes a difference, but still, like, I wish we could do more stadium style lighting. Like they do in basketball, but it's got to do with goalies losing the puck and different things like that. So I understand it, but some arenas, kind of pulled it off. Like Seattle, I haven't been there yet. I'll get there later this year. I like the way it looks on TV, the way it's lit. Like, it does drop off after about 10 rows and starts to get darker. Tampa was doing that as well in the upper bowl. And so it does make it feel a little bit more intimate in such a big arena. But yeah, I mean, it's changed drastically. Like you say, the ring of light that goes around as a photographer can have a big impact on you. It can slightly change your exposure.
Yep.
It can change the color cast of things. Because those LEDs are so bright and powerful now. And in fact, like they can overthrow the strobes. So I haven't shot strobes since prior to 2020. I remember in the bubble going to Edmonton in game 1, and I abandoned the lights immediately, like during warm up, because I'm like, I'm not overpowering the strobes. I'm barely overpowering them. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to barely overpower the ambient light here, why limit myself to one frame every 2 seconds when the LED light is still strobed is still to
It's
me
superior. Yeah.
it's superior. But when it's that close in an arena like that, my theory was like, okay, abandon the strobes and be able to get myself more frames per second, and in the reality of it, in the end, as long as you get the shot, that's what's important. And technology, post-processing, everything is so good today. And let's face it, most of it's used online. So we're not making big, giant corporate ads and posters and billboards and things like that the way that we used to. So it works, and then you have more of an opportunity to capture the moment versus potentially missing something because you're waiting for lights to recycle.
Yeah. Was your digital switch during the Stanley Cup Finals a little bit easier because you were on lights, so you weren't having to shoot at like 800 or 1600 ISO and it sucked, and you were able to keep a lower ISO so your digital pain wasn't so brutal?
Yes, absolutely. Like I shot strobed hockey, like I say, right up until 2020. So I was able to shoot at finals and all that through those eras of crazy noise in the cameras and everything. I was shooting at 100, depending on the arena and the lights and the level, the height of the ceiling, anywhere from 100 to maybe 400 ISO. So the quality of the stuff was brilliant, so yeah, it was something I didn't have to worry about for the most part.
Because I'm sure you heard it in the media room from some of those guys who were just dying.
Oh my God, yeah. They're just dying, and complaining about the quality and especially too for some of the press guys, where depending on how the quality of the level of the publication that it was going in, like stuff could look like garbage,
right. AP. I remember listening to like poor Mark Terrell or any of those AP guys, literally almost in tears because they didn't even have certain like I remember when he started shooting digital, they didn't have the Nikon couldn't even reproduce a Laker yellow. Mm-hmm. So it was looking like mustard. So he was dying. He's looking at his monitor going, what do I do? I'm like, send it. Nothing you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too, I should mention is I was probably one of the last in the industry to make the switch. I was scared of it. I was comfortable with shooting, slide film. I loved it. And because of the partnership with Getty that the NHL developed, I eventually had no choice. I had to switch over to digital. So there was a bit of a period there where I was shooting both film and digital at the same time. Because the league was still so comfortable with Chrome stuff. And so it was a weird balancing act there. But I didn't go digital until I think it was 2002. It was either late 2001 or early 2002. So guys had already been shooting digital for 3-4 years. Mm-hmm. When I went digital, I was shooting Nikon still. Was it the 1DX back then?
Yep.
Colors were, when you look back on it and everything, like the tone of flesh and certain colors in uniforms, just a little bit off in how they would reproduce. But that was just, it is what it is, right? That's the way I always looked at it. And obviously it's changed and evolved ever since then. And my biggest issues back then were focus. There was a 1DX had a serial number series from, whatever number to whatever number, but they had a lot of bodies that were having back focus issues.
That's right.
Both of mine were like that. And my bodies were into Nikon every 3 months. It was so frustrating to have a guy lining up for a face-off and it looks in focus in my camera and I take a photo and then I look at it on the computer and it's back focused by, ever so slightly. And it's like, I would take them in over and over and over and over. And they kept saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with them, and it's like, here's the evidence. And anyway, I ended up switching to Canon as a result. And that's, what I've been ever since.
It's funny. Canon had that same issue with like the 1D Mark 2 or whatever, and guys were discovering it during the Stanley Cup. During a Ducks, I don't know who it was, Ducks Detroit, Ducks Red Wings, whatever that was. And they were same thing. It's funny how the Stanley Cup was discovering people's, back focus issues.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, not like it's a preseason game or something. It's
right.
like the biggest event of the year. And it's like, oh, great. And it's frustrating when you do everything within your power to get the moment, to be there, and it's technology that's failing you. Right. And it still happens today, whether it's with remotes or whatever. You can do everything, jump through hoops, and you're there hours early and you get everything all set up, and it's technology that fails you.
Right.
And that's super frustrating. Like we discovered this year with with Canon now, when some of the firmware updates, doing a remote, it happened like where I discovered it was the Winter Classic this year. Had my remote in the dashers, like behind the net, shot the first period and everything's tack sharp. And then turned the camera off, popped the card, put a new card in, everything's out of focus just by a hair. And what it is, it's a reset that it would do on the lens. So it just even though it's taped down and on manual focus,
it would override.
It overrides. And so I was like scratching my head, like, how does this happen? Like, and then I, refocused it. So some stuff was sharp again eventually. And then in between periods again, same thing happened. And it's like scratching my head. Didn't figure this out till finals when, again, we were talking with Bruce at finals. And this was an issue. It had been brought up. And so they're like, yeah, don't turn your cameras off. Just keep the card in.
But see, that used to be the kiss of death, pulling your card out with your camera on, because they're always worried about static and you would lose your card images.
Right. Oh. I think things have changed so much now that I haven't heard of that happening in the longest time.
Right, but it's our habit.
Now, yeah, and also as well, like for me, we're having this discussion in Vegas. My camera was overhead, and I wasn't accessing it till the end of the game anyhow. So I just left it on, didn't worry about it, and everything was sharp.
Funny how that works.
But yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, technology can fail you, and you can show up and do everything right, but when technology fails you, you sort of have to learn to, let it roll off your back, like water off a duck's back type thing, because it's not your fault,
right?
When tech fails you, and it does happen. It's just the age of technology. So
I think the sad thing about that too is because now there's less and less true professional photographers, right? Like you're not running into Calutho every weekend in St. Louis, in Ottawa, in Vancouver. So you guys don't banter in the media or go out to dinner afterwards and talk about, hey, you know what? My camera's kind of acting goofy. And so then you guys can like reverse engineer it. So if there's less and less of us actually working, those moments can't be discovered. And that's what's kind of sad.
Yeah, you make a really brilliant point there. Because that's something that always would happen, like, you're just out having a beer or having dinner, and you're like inevitably the chatter comes around to that type of thing. And as I say, there used to be 40 some of us shooting a game like that at the Stanley Cup final. And now we've got maybe just over 20, or less, between 15 and 20 some years. Like, and it's different too. Like I would say, like you're not traveling as much throughout the regular season and going from rink to rink. So you don't form those friendships like we used to back in the day. So when I'm at the arena in Vegas or Florida, I mean, there's the core people that I've always known, but a lot of the younger, newer photographers, when I say newer, they could have been around for the last 10 years or so. I know who they are. We know who one another are, but we don't have that bond or those relationships. And, life's different. Everybody's got their own things and on the go. And, a lot of people that are local may just kind of go do their thing, whereas we're at the hotel. It's changed over the years. So yeah, that is a factor where you're just not discussing the ins and outs of the game like that, and your own gear and what may or may not have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're exactly this way back in the day. And again, life is different. But there wasn't a time I would travel and I didn't meet up with somebody in Buffalo or Philly or wherever because, hey, you're in town. Let's go afterwards. Oh, you're going to cover the game. I'm covering the game, or I'm working the night shift. We'll meet up afterwards. And it was always like that. Now, if I travel, it's very, I can't, or this or that. And it's like, or those papers don't exist. Those people are gone. Right.
Well, yeah, that's a huge factor in it all, is so many of the publications that just simply don't exist anymore.
Right.
And so many people that for the first half of my career that I was surrounded by are just gone.
Yeah. I remember in 2013, I am covering Chicago's playing somebody in the finals, and I was doing something for ESPN. I'm with the Angels at the time.
Boston.
Yeah. And I'm at the Angels later that year. And we're in Chicago playing the Cubs. That's the day they let go of half of the sun. The sun got let go. So I saw all those guys in May. In August, they're gone. The paper went from 2 paper town to 1 paper town. So 30 people like that I would go have dinner, no editors from workshops or whatever, unemployed. And it's like, oh my God, how did that happen?
Yep. It's been a shame to see it. I mean, it was a trickle at the beginning, and then it felt like there was a big fallout and so many people lost. And now in the last few years, it's back to the trickle, but it's still happening, like there was a peak period there where the bottom just kind of fell out. And it is a shame. Like it's so many brilliant shooters who've had to kind of reinvent themselves or go on to another type of career or whatever it may be, because the industry just changed so much.
Have you noticed, let's see, so you had Vegas and Florida. So you got decent sized newspapers there. Mm-hmm. Tampa, Colorado, Tampa, Montreal, Tampa, Dallas. Those are like the last. Well, those are bubbles, so that's a problem too. Okay, so let's go
bubbles, different factor.
Right, let's go pre-bubble. So Tampa, Dallas, St. Louis, Boston. Again, Vegas, Caps, Pens, Nashville. So again, decent towns. Capitals got a big paper. Boston, big paper, history. Are you still seeing them cover the finals like those papers might have covered them in the 90s? Or are they, instead of not sending 4 photographers, 5 photographers, are they sending 1 or a guy? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big change. Those, any of those papers that still exist are still there covering it. But as you say, back in the day, they might have been sending anywhere from 2 to possibly 4 shooters.
Right.
And somebody's shooting outside and somebody's roaming, somebody's shooting elevated, somebody's shooting ice level. And now it might be 1, maybe 2, depending on the publication. So it's a huge change for sure.
Wow.
And yeah, like you say, all those really realistically, like a lot of those going back over the last 6-7 years of cups that you just listed. Yeah, there's a lot of cities with big media publications still, but everything's just shrunk. It really, really has for those industries, and that's a reflection on who shows up at the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah,
and we used to get photographers coming from Europe as well, right?
Sure,
back in the day,
because there's some European, Russian, Finn guy was in the finals. It was big deal.
Yeah, and now you don't see that anymore. I couldn't tell you the last time we saw a photographer from Europe covering Stanley Cup final. I can't remember.
Oh God.
So yeah, it's changed, and that's where like as every year passes, like I just count my blessings that I'm still there. I know that it could be gone and taken away from me in a moment's notice. So as I started creeping closer to 25 Stanley Cups, I was just like, if I can just get to 25, like that milestone marker, what I mean? I don't want to stop now, believe me, but I I'm well aware when I've been watching the evolution of sports photography over the years that it could end any time. So I soak it up as much as I can. Like I love it just as much as the day I started.
Yeah. So it's not getting old. You still love it.
Oh no, I absolutely love it. It's magic, like to see, to have the opportunity to cover sports history from a front row seat, like, and that's the other side of it I look at is like the greatest and biggest and wealthiest hockey fan in the world can't do what I get to do. There is no money can't purchase the experience that I get, and I get paid for it. I get, somebody puts me on a plane and flies me across the country and puts me up in a nice hotel, and I'm in the arena with access that you can't pay for. I have a front row seat to the game. I'm on the ice pregame, for the anthems and player intros. I'm on the ice postgame. I'm, whether I can walk down the hallways and be on the bench during warm up and, be in the locker room. And like I say, this is all access that as a fan, you can't get. There is no amount of money in the world that can pay for that experience. So like I say, I don't take it for granted. And I think as each year goes on, and especially too during the bubble year and everything, and like we had a lockout year where there was nothing happening, those years really, really make it hit home for me of just how special and important it is. And like I say, I'm covering hockey history. When I walk into a place like Chicago or Toronto or Boston and I see the history of what's on their walls, and now to see like some of those clubs like Chicago and Boston, where those are my photos on their walls and guys are looking at every day when they come in. And in Tampa, like the corridors where the players go out to the ice, when I was there in 2021 for finals, those walls are all just big murals, like photos that are put onto the walls were all my photos lining that hallway as the players come and go from the ice. And I'm, there's Stamkos scoring, when he came back and played and got that big, he got a big goal in the bubble.
Does that give you butterflies? Does that make you kind of weak in the knees?
Yeah, and to see that picture larger than life, and then Vasilevsky throwing his blocker and trapper in the air, and that was shot from my net cam, and the team photos and guys hoisting the cup, and I'm like, and all these banners that the league brings in that are larger than life, the guys hoisting the cup and the history of the Stanley Cup, and so many of those are my images. It gives me chills, and it's a special honor, like where I think like, oh my God, like I look at all the history here and all these players, those pictures are there for a reason, because those players feed off of that. They see it. They want to make their own history. Mm-hmm. And then there I am again with the chance to document what maybe they're going to do. So it's super special. It's not lost upon me. And as I say, I think as my career has gone on, it just becomes more and more special. I think there was a time early in my career, like I said, I don't want to say that I ever took it for granted, but I think the younger, more, immature me was like, well, I'll be doing this for a while now. I got to a certain point where I'm like, yeah, I'll be doing it for a while. Whereas now I'm like, every year I'm like, okay, is this it? Because things just change so rapidly and things that are out of your control. So I soak up every single moment I can. And like, I don't know if, when people see me on TV or in the locker room or whatever, like my face hurts the next day because I'm smiling so much behind the camera, because it's such and I'm so happy for everybody that gets to win. And I'm so happy to see these moments unfold. And in your head when you hit the shutter and you've got a special moment, like you just automatically know. And it's a feel good moment for myself. And it's just, you're surrounded by pure joy and happiness.
Right.
There's a few moments there where the club that loses are still on the ice, and I think I maybe mentioned before when we talked, like I had tears coming down my cheeks when the Oilers lost to the Canes after the lockout. And, you know, Ryan Smith, was the one who consoled me, and I do get emotional about it. And I think that's part of what helps me be a great shooter is I am so emotionally attached to it all. And when like this year, I knew people on both sides, not on the players' side, personal relationships, but within the clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so heartbroken for the guys I know in Florida that lost, but I was elated for the people on Vegas that won. And, when you see the people that, whether it's been players or team personnel or whatever over the years that lose, it's almost like I don't know. Like I feel like I'm at a funeral and you don't know how to act in front of them, like especially on the ice after the fact. But I've still got my job to do. And then they leave the ice, and then it's sort of I can let that go and then just enjoy the moment of whoever's out there and with whoever's out there. And like I say, I soak it up as much as I have, a job to do. I think that's what allows me to do it so well, is because I really immerse myself in the moment. I'm not just a robot out there that's, like I wear my heart in my sleeve, and whether it's the emotions of humans or animals or everything, that's what really gets me going. And so I think it helps me to capture a lot of the cool key moments that I've seen over the years of the Stanley Cup final, especially post game.
Right. Do you get player recognition where they see you and they go, "Oh, hey, Dave"? And I ask that not to be like, "Oh yeah, players recognize me," but when you're trying to make moments before a game, maybe in a hallway, sharpening blades or curving a stick, like that, they're like, "Okay, it's Dave. I don't have to worry about him."
Absolutely. It's those relationships that I think have what helped make my career as good and as special as it's been.
That's good.
Not just at a Stanley Cup final, whether it's been All-Star,
right?
Regular season events or whatever. It doesn't happen as much because I don't shoot the regular season like I used to. I don't shoot junior hockey anymore, where I used to develop a lot of these relationships.
Yep. So
many of the guys that I had those relationships are gone. There's still a few left in the league for sure. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And whether it's, equipment guys, the trainers, the equipment managers, coaching personnel. Oh yeah, it's Dave. So it's cool.
Right.
I've earned their respect, and like, I'll never forget, in the 2000 and, the 2006 World Cup, being in the locker room and Mario Lemieux making a comment about myself and thanking me for what I do for them and the trust that they have in me, that I can do these, that, like, they don't have to worry when I'm there. I'm not there to make them look bad. And Sidney Crosby, even, he wrote a letter to, I was trying to get on like a full-time staff position at one point with the league back in the mid 2000s or so. And Sid wrote a beautiful reference letter where he spoke to that, saying the players trust Dave implicitly, and we can be ourselves around him. And I actually had that on my website. I've still got it saved. It was just really beautiful what he said. That means more to me than anything, knowing that guys, can look at me and just know that, oh, this is okay. I've had guys like Sid's come to me on the ice when they've won the Stanley Cup and like, hey, I need you to get this. Or, when the Ducks won in '07, I remember I had to shoot the owner and his wife, and I'm shooting the owner and the wife, and in the background I can see everybody assembling for the team photo, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna be late for this, I'm gonna have a horrible position and everything. And then Pronger turned around and so they were all facing the penalty box side, the team, and all the so where I'm situated was kind of on the blue line, face off dot. Players are all facing, and I'm on the penalty box side. and all the players are facing that way. And I started to come around, and I'm like, they wanted the photo to be so the players were facing the bench. And that's where I remember my main bank of strobes was as well. So I'm like, I'm, kind of like freaking out, like, oh, this is going to be all backwards. And walking over there, and Chris Pronger saw me, and he's like, everybody turn around. And he got the entire team to turn around, and all the photographers that were lined up in the carpet all had to come around and pile around me. And I was like, not in that moment, but it's like, holy smoke, like, that's respect. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, all the players absolutely loved you, and there were 30 guys on the ice that wanted to beat you into submission after having to move from one spot to the next.
Yeah. So I like I say, the relationships I've built over the years, like I say, I can be in the back hallways, and guys are doing their thing, and they don't mind me being around, and I've always been respectful of that. I have an idea when guys don't want me there, or when to put the camera down. I've never given them a reason to not trust me, and it's as I say, that those opportunities have, they've made for some really wonderful moments. I remember too, like the PR director for the Blackhawks in 2015 coming up and putting his arm around me in the locker room and being like, saying something to the effect of like, we love seeing you around, because when we see you, we know we've done something right, and it's like, that's cool.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're in a good place if you're around.
Yeah. Yeah. So
you're never covering anybody on a 13-game losing streak. No.
Well, maybe in Toronto I have a few. That's where I shot the most, and that's just their history. So.
How has your travel personally changed with gear from that 98 to most recently a couple months ago? Do you pack different? Do you travel different? Obviously, the gear itself has changed with, what gear you're using then and now, but how do you travel differently? Or do you?
I have a lot more. But no, honestly, it hasn't changed a lot. I guess there's a little bit less stress now, because there was a time where it's like they're weighing your gear bag, and like you have to, speak to somebody, and it's like, well, this is important. I need it on the other end when I land. It's all breakable. It's, it's camera gear, et cetera. So
right.
There would be those stresses of going to the airport and, having to speak to somebody a lot. And thankfully, knock on wood, I never had an issue of getting it on. And I didn't even have as much back then. Like right now, if I'm taking a full gear bag, like I've heard too many horror stories and seen too many horror stories over the years of guys packing lenses and bodies and, putting them in Pelican cases and putting them under the plane, and they don't show up on the other end, or they show up damaged. Yeah. So I have always carried all my bodies and lenses on. The only thing I pack in my check bags are like remote things like magic arms and clamps and my neck cam. I'll pack like pocket wizards and stuff, but make sure they're uber protected and all the cords and cables and things like that. But bodies, lenses, batteries, cards, things like that. Back in the day, film, it would always be in my carry-on. And you used to have to kind of, I'd say 60% of the time, speak to somebody because it was overweight,
right?
And hope that, they're going to allow you on with it, which they did. You had to, film, make sure it didn't go through the x-ray machine, things like that. So, whereas nowadays, I have a 40-liter backpack and I pack it like Tetris. Thankfully for programs like Nexus and Trusted Traveler, it makes life so much easier because I don't have to take my computer out or anything, put it on the belt. It goes through. Maybe 1 out of 25 times they might open the bag and take a look or whatever. So it makes my life much easier, a lot less stress when you're going through the airport. But yeah, I've kind of always traveled the same way like that. My bag's heavier, and if somebody's like, oh, I mean, they don't really weigh the carry-ons much anymore, maybe in Europe, but I usually just am like, I got like 16 lithium batteries in there. First thing I say, and then you show them and it's like, okay, well, that's got to go on.
Yep. That's got to go with you.
Yeah. So,
how many cameras are you taking?
4.
Okay. Are you all the same body?
No, I'm not. The camera's in hand now. I'm using 2 Canon R5s.
Okay.
And then in the net, I've got a Canon 1DX Mark II.
Okay.
And then I also have on my body as well Canon 1DX Mark III.
Okay. Yes.
So they're my 4 bodies. Sometimes I will use the other 1DX as a remote. So I may have, overhead remote and one in the net, or alternate angle, one in the net. In the bubble, I use 5 bodies.
So you're keeping it pretty simple with just 1, maybe 2 remotes. You're not going remote crazy.
No, and I mean, I don't need to as well, because other than the bubble, like in the bubble, there was 2 of us.
Right. Yeah.
But when I'm working a Stanley Cup final, like I'm always working with the team guys, right? So in Florida this year, Elliot Schechter, the Florida Panthers guy, Elliot's had 11 remote bodies up the whole season. Put them up at the start of the season,
and he's left.
Took them down after the cup, and I well, what do I need to put another remote in for?
Yeah, where am I going to cover that Elliot hasn't?
Yeah, so I'm just putting extra work on our editors, right? So I've always looked at Stanley Cup like we're a team, So what are you guys doing that I can either do differently, or just know that I'm not just providing excess crap for our editors when you've already got it covered. So that's the way we always kind of look at it. And to me, I've always looked at it sort of like simple is better. I've done more remotes in the past, and it's like, you can make yourself remote crazy and walk away with nothing, or your camera in hand just ends up being crap, because if something goes wrong, you're concentrating on trying to sort getting your remote right, and so over the years, I've simplified things where I'll do 2 remotes at the most, and they're on the same channel. Oftentimes, like I say, I'll put a net cam in and I'll have an overhead over that same net. And then that way, when the play's down the ice, that's what I'm concentrating on.
Right.
And as a result, I've made some really incredible moments with that. And then once the, play starts to break out over the blue line, then I'm concentrating on the play with my cameras in hand. I usually have a fisheye around my neck, or a very close hand. So when the play comes in close, and I use a 28 to 300, cover everything else. And as I say, if I have that third body there, I often will have my 200 to 400 just to get stuff on the bench. Or sometimes, I will say, okay, well, there's a power play, a 5-on-3 down to the far end. So I might shoot with that camera and that lens, and I'll just have my remote trigger on the front of the camera type thing. So, but I try to keep it simple. And I feel that I'm more productive that way versus trying to put up, half a dozen or whatever remotes.
Yeah, no, sometimes less is more, and you're focused and you're not trying to juggle 3 cameras around your neck like some war photographer. You're just trying to I got this and I'm going to kill with this.
Yeah, exactly. And the 28 to 3 is such a versatile lens.
How is that lens? I've never touched it. It sounds.
I love it. I've had, I've had 3 of them now over the years, and they've stopped making it now. So I got to baby the one that I have. The last time I took it in for repair back in November, they right away, she's like, oh, this may be on the do not repair list, and sure enough, it is now on the do not repair list because they've kiboshed it. And I hope that they come out with something in the R series lenses to replace that. But it's the focal length is so great, and especially shooting on lights over the years, it was phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
If you don't have nice contrasty light, that's where it maybe, it can be iffy, especially at the 300 range.
Okay.
Because it needs that nice contrasty light.
Snap.
But
yeah,
I think now the LED lighting in all the buildings is snappy and contrasty, and I haven't had any issues with it. But that, I would love just a few more millimeters on the short end. But so yeah, the fisheye that I keep, or my, depending on, I'll keep my 16 to 35 sometimes on there, and I just have it pre-focused for what's going to happen maybe 3 to 4 feet in front of me, and as I say, it's either on my hip or it's around my neck, so I can quickly just
pull it up
this
and go
when the play's coming in. I mean, I might go through some games where I've only shot like 10 frames on it, or no frames.
Right.
It's not my priority. I would prefer to shoot 90% of the game or more with that 28 to 300.
Yeah, but if they're on the glass, what can you do? That's all you got.
Yeah, exactly. It's there just in case type thing. And yeah, you don't make a ton of pictures by, throwing that short lens up, but every now and then you make some real bangers, and yeah, it's just there to have. But I would say 90% of the game is shot on one lens, my 28 to 300.
Has there been, in those 25 years, one game where you're like, wow, I'm glad I covered that game. That was magic.
I've said that several times, I think. I really have. And to ask specifics right now, I've covered so many. Like I remember kind of sitting there and counting last year. Like I've covered every single game. Well, I shouldn't say that now until last year. I got COVID in 2021, or 2022. Sorry. So I missed. I shot the first 2 games in Colorado, flew to Florida, and I missed games 3, 4, and 5, and then I was back out for game 6.
Okay.
So those are the first games of the Stanley Cup final since 1997 that I missed covering. And so I've covered like 130 something Stanley Cup final games, I think it is now. So it's hard to remember all the details, but yeah, like, I mean, Brett Hull in 1999, scoring in overtime, like that was a hugely historic game, and one I will never forget. I think the games that have gone to overtime, like when Rodriguez scored in 2014 for LA over the Rangers, scored in overtime to win the cup. Like, there's nothing more exciting than an overtime Stanley Cup winning goal, and I nailed that one as well, and the celebration, and again, that's where you talk about changing positions. I was in the far end, and I had to come to the Zamboni gate, and I opted, when the Kings were shooting at that end at the Zam gate, to go shoot through glass, and shoot a little bit looser. And I nailed that moment, and if I didn't move then I wouldn't have had that, So again, you just never know where things are going to unfold. But and then there's just been, whether it's been a game 1 or a game 3, there's been all kinds of games where you leave the rink and you're like, oh my God, like
right.
What a game that was,
There's a lot of those games I've covered where it's game 3 was fantastic, but that team didn't win, but the game itself was unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, let's face it, like, you're talking about the best hockey this season is played in those last 2 rounds. Sometimes, to me, like, yeah, the Stanley Cup has been, it's like, oh, the Stanley Cup was played in the conference finals, like 2 years ago, Edmonton and Colorado, that series, like, it was short, but it was like, that should have been the cup final, it was a sweep, but those games were all 1-goal games in overtime. And, you're like, that hockey was just unbelievable, and it's sort of, I look at it that way. Like, sometimes the best hockey has been played in the conference final, but let's face it, overall, Stanley Cup final is, in the big picture over, history, it's the best hockey. And
would you ever, I guess, go to the, none of the leagues do this, but basketball does this in college. We seed the Stanley Cups from 1 to 16. So it's not conferences, but one plays 16, two plays 15, so you have a better chance of getting the two best teams at the end.
Yeah, I kind of wish the NHL would kind of go back to that format. Not necessarily like 1 to 16, but within the conference, right? Like one plays 8, two plays 7, and so on. Because let's face it, the last few years we've had some amazing teams eliminated, in the first round.
Right.
You've got, just because of the way it's done now. Like I know I've talked to a lot of players that aren't a big fan of the playoff format now. I've not been a fan of it. I would like to see that seeding again, because like if you're shouldn't use Boston as an example this year because they played the lowest seed.
Right. Yeah.
But there has been cases where a high seeded team is playing another high seeded team in the first round. And it's like, why are you busting your butt in the regular season to finish at the top of your division,
right,
or second or whatever, only to play another second or third place team? Or, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
there should be some reward for finishing at the top of your division or conference or whatever. And that is playing those lower seeded teams. So when you are a team that finishes first or second and you end up playing against, say you're a second place seed and you play the third place seed. Well, where's your reward? Why did you bust your butt to
you should be playing
accomplish
the
what
seed.
you did in the regular season only to be handed a team that finished 2 points behind you? So I do like the seeding, 1 to 16 would be super interesting, because I want to see the best teams.
Yeah.
And if you happen to be, like this year, Boston was obviously the best team in the regular season. It was unbelievable. But at the same time, and they played the lowest ranking seed in Florida. Florida, up until finals, was the strongest and most consistent team in the playoffs. They were. The playoffs is a different season, and if you
totally
finish last and you squeeze in like they did, Edmonton did it when they played Carolina. They were the last place team to make the playoffs, and they turned it on at the right time, and they were the most consistent team until about game 3 or 4 of the Stanley Cup final. And Florida did the same thing this year, but Vegas was the most consistent in the West in the playoffs. They deserved to be where they were. They deserved it in the end. And kudos to those teams like a Florida. If you are a last place team and you turn it on at the right time and you beat those high seeded clubs, then I fully respect that. But I don't like to see those matchups early on where you have like a 2 playing 3 or 3 playing 4, and you're potentially eliminating one of the top 3 or 4 seeded teams. I want to see the best players and the best teams have the best opportunity to continue to advance.
Yeah. Especially, in the end, we're selfish. We want to see the best teams because we want to make the best pitchers.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's just how it is.
Sure.
Now, great. There's always a Cinderella story and the Florida Panthers come out of nowhere. They squeak in and then they make a run. But in the end, you really do want to see 1 versus 2, or the two teams that have really just kicked ass all year long. And that's going to make, hopefully, a better Stanley Cup final.
Well, a better story. Like let's face it. I wanted to see a Boston Edmonton final this year.
Oh, you did.
There's a fan in me.
Yes.
And there's a fan of the game. And it's like, I mean, Edmonton only finished 2 points out of first overall in the West. Vegas, I go back quickly. I'll go back to when teams lose the first game of the season. They're like, oh, there's 81 more to go. It's just one game. Well, in the end, Edmonton finished 1 game back, 1 win shy of winning the conference. Would that have been the difference for them if they got home ice against Vegas? You just never know, right?
Right. That's all it takes.
And they split, if I recall, against Vegas. So had they won 1 more game against Vegas, they would have had home ice. Could that have made the difference? Who knows? We'll never know. Right. But they were only 1 point out of first, so they were essentially one of the best teams in the West. Boston best in the East. I want to see that. As a sports fan, as a NHL photographer, I want to see the best of the best, and that through the course of the regular season, they were 2 of the best.
Right.
So yeah, it's like as the playoffs were whittling down, and it's like, oh wow. And then the other factor is, like I've mentioned, cities and where you go. Okay, well, I don't want to, sound like some arrogant Canadian, but there is nothing better than a Stanley Cup final in this country of Canada.
Right.
Like when it comes to the game of hockey, Boston maybe somewhat compares, but it's such a massively large city. Things still can get lost there. Same with Chicago. Like it's just that they're so big that they still get lost, especially New York. It's like you leave the arena and you're like, oh, there's a Stanley Cup final happening.
Right.
Because it's just so massive and there's so many millions of people. Whereas in Canada, like whether it's been Montreal, Edmonton, Calgary, or Vancouver, like it is everything. And it's everything. It's everywhere. It's all everybody talks about. It is like every little suburban road you drive down, there are signs, there's jerseys, there's flags, and the streets are filled with people. And it's so exciting. So I was hoping to see that. And I've seen that in Boston, like in the downtown core and game days, where it's like there are thousands of people that ascend on downtown to just be around and be part of that atmosphere. And
well,
that just doesn't happen in Florida. Like still this year in Florida, I went places, people are like, oh, where are you from? And like, oh, what are you here for? I'm like, oh, I'm here for, like if you mention the Panthers, it's like, who? I'm not exaggerating. Some people are like, who?
Yeah.
The Florida Panthers, your hockey team. What? There's a team here? I'm like, oh my God, like really? This is still happening?
Right.
Or you mentioned the Stanley Cup final and they'd be like, what's that? And I'm like, you live 20 minutes from the arena. How do you not know at this day and age with a team that's been around here for 30 years? Like you don't even know there's a Stanley Cup final, let alone your team's in it.
Nope.
So it's a different feeling. It really is. So like it's
been a long time. I mean, a long time since two Canadian teams played in the Stanley Cup final. 1989, right? Wasn't it Calgary and
Montreal?
Montreal. I mean, Jesus Christ, Dave, you were what, 9?
Not quite, but
Jesus. I mean,
you're right. Like I would love to see an all Canadian final. Like, and I've not been a Leaf fan at all, but as the playoffs, we're going to the playoffs. I'm like, not that I would admit it, but yeah, if there was a Edmonton Toronto final, like it would be in this country would just shut down.
Right.
Like
They'd lose their mind.
Lose their mind. Exactly. So you can't compare any finals in the States or cities to it.
Nope.
And so that's why I say I look at the cities and the teams and there's all these other little elements that I look at as to why I would like to go where we go for finals.
Well, you haven't even shot a Canadian winner, right? In 25 years, there's not been one Canadian team that's won.
No.
Yeah.
No. Come close to seeing some win, but no, have not seen a Canadian winner.
Yeah. I mean, for the love of God, all these weird offshoot teams have won, and not one Canadian team has pulled it in for you.
And so anyway, like it's one of those things where, I look at all that and I think like this year conference finals, it's like all 4 teams are in the South, like kudos to the league. And like, it's proving that hockey in the South is working. Florida, the Stanley Cup has been in the state of Florida 4 years in a row. Well, played in Alberta, but a Florida team there. And when I think about now, like Dallas and Anaheim and LA and Vegas and, the Lightning, the Panthers, Carolina, like there's been so much Stanley Cup hockey played in the southern states, and don't get me wrong, like some of those like Vegas has an incredible fan base. Carolina has an incredible fan base. Tampa has an incredible fan base, but it's very tight knit, it doesn't expand, statewide or province-wide or whatever like it does here. So it is different. And that's why I say this year, I really hoped for an Edmonton-Boston final because I'm like 2 incredible hockey teams, so much incredible talent, incredible hockey cities to go to. So that's the fan in me in the beginning. That's like, that's why I want to go to these places, because it's the overall It's got the makeup of everything that makes a great Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, that's what you want.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you've shot 25. How many more do you think you got in you?
25.
Okay. All right. Well,
I would love to hit 50. I mean, I'm freelance photographer. I'm never going to be able to retire unless there's a sugar mama out there, but not that I want to retire. I don't. I love what I do. And if I'm capable of doing this for another 25 years, I want to. I absolutely love what I do. Like I say, I don't want to retire. I will only retire when I'm sort of forced to retire or forced to stop shooting this game. I hope that I can stay on the ball and continue to do it for as long as I can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time and talking about it, because I love the fact that there's somebody that has covered 25. There's not a lot of photographers left that get to cover one event for such a long period of time. And hockey is such a special thing. I don't think there's enough people that give it enough attention. I don't think TV does hockey the justice. You really got to go in person and experience it, especially if you can go see it in a Canadian arena. It's a much different experience. They joke about LA's got 20,000 strong King fans, but that's it. Just enough to fill, the crypto arena, and then that's it. But I'm glad you've been there to be able to cover, make unbelievable images, meet all those people. I mean, you've given them unbelievable experiences with your coverage and the images that you've made, and that's nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That means a lot.
No, it's great. It's good stuff. I mean, God knows you could be doing worse things. You could be neck deep in frozen water shooting animals. Oh, wait a minute. You do that. Crazy ass.
I keep asking them if they can drill a hole at center ice for me. I can just kind of pop up and pop back down when I need to.
Yeah, that's it.
That hasn't happened yet.
Don't mind him. He does this naturally.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate it. You keep going, brother, and we'll catch up sometime soon.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you having me back on, and it's nice to hear that some of the listeners requested this.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing myself again, what I've said and what I bumbled over, and I'll be sure to share it with my audience as well. So thank you.
All right. You're the best, Dave. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Dave. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button and become a subscriber to the podcast. Remember to follow the Just a Good Conversation podcast on Instagram, and you can find all the past shows on our website at justagoodconversation.com. Thank you for listening.